My husband packed me a poisoned lunch with a note that said, "Eat every bite, my love." And 30 minutes later, the call that came wasn't about me. It was about his girlfriend, lying on her kitchen floor. I'm telling this story first person, the way I lived it, because some mornings I still wake up and touch my own face just to remember I'm still here. The frost was thick on the windows of our house in Oakville that morning, the kind of late October cold that makes you want to stay under the covers. Except I never stayed under the covers. I was up at 6. Same as always, grinding the coffee beans my husband liked. The dark roast he always complained was never quite hot enough by the time he came downstairs. My name doesn't matter much in this story. What matters is who I was to him. His wife. 15 years his wife. I set his mug down across from him at the table, the good table, the one we'd bought at a little shop in the Distillery District back when we still went on dates, downtown. He didn't look up. He was on his phone, thumb moving fast, his jaw tight in that way it had been tight for months now. "Your eggs are getting cold, Marshall," I said. I'd made them the way he liked, soft, a little cheese folded in. He grunted, didn't even glance at the plate. "Not hungry. I keep telling you not to bother." I'd heard that 100 times that year. I still made the eggs anyway. There's a kind of stubborn hope in that, in still setting a plate down for a man who hasn't looked at you with warmth in longer than you want to admit. I told myself it was patience. Looking back, I think it was just fear of what would happen if I stopped trying. He took a hurried sip of coffee, stood, straightened his tie. He managed a logistics firm out near the airport, did well for himself, better than well, and said he had a packed day, and not to call unless it was an emergency. I reached for his hand the way I always did. He let me hold it for half a second before he pulled away and walked out the door without looking back. After he left, I sat there in that big quiet kitchen and felt something I couldn't name, a heaviness, low in my chest. I'd felt it building for weeks, honestly, ever since I found a hotel receipt in his coat pocket from a Marriott, not 10 minutes from his office, a hotel, on a Tuesday afternoon. When he told me he'd been at a supplier meeting in Mississauga, I never said anything. I told myself I was imagining things. I prayed about it, actually, kneeling right there in the kitchen the way my mother taught me, asking God to soften whatever was hardening in my husband's heart. I know how that sounds now. I know. Meanwhile, in the back of his car, Marshall was anything but calm. His phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from a woman named Bianca, 29, a marketing consultant he'd met at a conference in Calgary the year before, and what had started as something he told himself was harmless had turned into the kind of mess that doesn't stay contained. Bianca wasn't asking anymore. She was demanding. A voice memo came through while he sat in traffic on the QEW, her voice sharp and wounded. "You promised you'd tell her by Thanksgiving, Marshall. I'm done waiting around like some secret. And don't forget, I still have those emails from when you moved money out of the company account for that consulting fee that never existed. So you tell me, is it going to be your marriage? Or your license to ever work in finance again?" He threw the phone onto the seat beside him like it had burned him. He wasn't lying about the money. There'd been a string of invoices over 2 years, shell payments to a consulting company that didn't exist, money that had quietly padded a separate account he thought no one would ever find. Bianca had found it. Bianca knew everything. And then there was the house. Everything. The house in Oakville, the cottage up near Muskoka, even a good chunk of his firm's original investment capital, had come from my side. My father had built a contracting business from nothing and left it to me when he passed. No children besides me. No one else to leave it to. If Marshall divorced me, he'd walk away with very little besides his car and his clothes. He'd grown used to a particular kind of life. He didn't want to go back to renting an apartment and driving something with 200,000 kilometers on it. If I died, though, if I simply died, of something sudden and explainable, something that wouldn't raise questions, everything would pass to him. No children meant no other claim. He'd be free. Free of the marriage, free to marry Bianca, free of the threat hanging over his career, all in one stroke. He told himself it wasn't really a plan at first. Just a thought, the kind of thought you're supposed to be horrified by and push away. But he didn't push it away. He turned it over and over until it stopped feeling monstrous and started feeling, in his mind, almost practical. He'd bought something months earlier. He told himself it was for the raccoons getting into the cottage's crawl space. That was the lie he told the supplier. A colorless, odorless substance he kept in a small bottle in his desk drawer at the office. The kind of thing that, mixed properly into something rich and strongly flavored, would never be tasted at all. He knew I had a weakness for the butter chicken from a place near the lake, the kind so heavy with cream and spice, you could mask almost anything in it. I loved that food. He knew exactly what to order. He had the car stop at the restaurant on the way into the city, picked up a container of butter chicken and rice, still warm, and asked the driver, A man named Desmond who'd worked for him for almost 9 years, who I'd always liked, who used to bring his grandkids by the office at Christmas. To find somewhere quiet to park for 15 minutes. Privacy for a call, he said. A lie, like everything else that day. In the back seat, with the partition raised, Marshall's hands weren't quite steady as he opened the container, drew the liquid into a small syringe, and worked it carefully into the chicken and the thick orange sauce, then sealed the lid back over it so nothing looked disturbed. The smell of cardamom and butter filled the car. It still looked beautiful. The kind of meal you'd want to eat the second you smelled it. He took out a notepad from his briefcase and wrote, in handwriting he tried to make soft, tried to make loving. I know I've been distant. This is your favorite, made the way you like it. Eat it all, eat it warm. I'm sorry for everything. Love, M. He stuck the note to the lid and felt he would later admit something close to satisfaction. How easy it was, he thought, to undo 15 years of distance with 4 sentences on a sticky note. Desmond, he said through the intercom. Take this to the house, make sure she eats it. I won't have time to come home before my 4 o'clock. He emphasized the word house deliberately. To him it meant one thing only, our house, the brownstone-style place on the bluff above the lake, the place where he wanted, God forgive me for even writing this, my body to be found. What Marshall forgot, in his rush, in his nerves, in the adrenaline of what he was doing, was that Desmond's understanding of the house hadn't meant just one place in almost a year. Because for almost a year, Marshall had been splitting his life in 2, and Desmond, quiet, observant, the kind of man who notices everything and says nothing, had been driving him through both halves of it. In the past, the house had only ever meant our house. Desmond used to drop Marshall off and watch me wave from the porch, the two of us still warm with each other back then. But for the last 10 months, Marshall almost never asked to be taken home after work. He asked for an address in a high-rise off Yonge Street, a building with a doorman who knew Desmond by name, a building where a young woman would come down to meet the car sometimes, laughing, hanging on Marshall's arm before they'd even gotten inside. Desmond sat at the red light, turning the instruction over in his mind. Take this to the house. Make sure she eats it. He thought of the note stuck to the lid, Love, M, and the tenderness of it didn't match anything he'd witnessed of Marshall and me in over a year. Marshall hadn't spoken to me with softness in his hearing for as long as he could remember. But Marshall and the young woman on Yonge Street, that was different. He'd overheard Marshall on the phone with her plenty of times, all honey and apology, buying her things, smoothing over arguments. Just the day before, Desmond had driven Marshall to a jeweler after the two of them had some kind of falling out over a handbag she wanted. This must be for her, Desmond decided. This is him making up for the fight. The light turned green. At the fork ahead, one road led toward our house on the bluff. The other led downtown, toward Yonge Street, toward the high-rise, toward Bianca. Without a second thought, Desmond turned toward the city. I want to be honest about how the rest of that day felt from where I stood, because I think it matters. I didn't know any of this was happening. I had no idea my husband had spent the morning planning my death. What I knew was that I had a slight ache in my jaw that had been bothering me since I woke up. Bad enough that I'd decided to skip lunch entirely and just have soup later, and that I'd promised to drop off boxes of donated coats and boots at the shelter downtown that afternoon. Something I did most Mondays through the church. I remember standing in the kitchen around noon, feeling this strange, sudden lightness pass through me, like something heavy had been lifted off my shoulders without my permission. I actually said out loud, to no one, why do I feel like I just got away with something? I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. If Desmond had brought that food to our house, I would have been fasting through the ache in my jaw and likely wouldn't have touched it right away. And even if I had, I doubt I could have chewed through rich, heavy food with my jaw aching the way it was. But none of that was tested, because the food never came to my door at all. It went somewhere else entirely. Across the city, on the 32nd floor of that glass tower, Bianca was having what she thought was the best afternoon she'd had in weeks. She opened the door to find Desmond holding a familiar container from her favorite restaurant. A note from Marshall stuck to the top in his handwriting. Eat it all. Eat it warm. Love, M. She read it twice and felt something in her chest unclench. He's finally choosing me, she thought. She tipped Desmond generously, closed the door, carried the container to her little table by the window with the skyline laid out in front of her, and took a photo of the food before she even opened it, posting it to her private story with the caption, "Finally, he gets it." She started eating before her phone had even finished uploading the photo. The first bites tasted wonderful, rich and warm, exactly the way she remembered it. There was a faint bitterness underneath that she chalked up to the sauce being a touch overcooked. She kept eating. She was hungry and happy, and the happiness made her careless. 15 minutes later, her hand went numb around her fork. She told herself it was nothing, that she'd slept on it wrong, and kept eating anyway. Because she didn't want to believe anything was wrong with a meal that had come with a note like that. By the time the cramping hit her stomach like a closed fist, she knew. She tried to stand, and her legs gave out from under her. She crawled toward her phone where it had fallen on the rug, her fingers clumsy and slow, and the last clear thought she had was Marshall's name. She called him twice. He didn't answer either time. His phone was on silent in his jacket pocket, sitting in a boardroom on Bay Street, where he was 3 hours into pretending to listen to a presentation about quarterly freight numbers, his mind somewhere else entirely, waiting for a call he thought would be about me. When his phone finally did ring, loud and sudden in that quiet boardroom, he nearly knocked his water glass off the table reaching for it. He looked at the screen, an unfamiliar number, a Toronto exchange, and felt a strange, sick anticipation. This is it, he thought. This is the call. Mr. Whitfield? I'm calling from St. Michael's Emergency Department. The woman on the line said, the noise of a hospital corridor behind her. Your number came up as the most recent call on a patient's phone. She's in critical condition. We need you to come in. For one terrible electric second, Marshall felt almost triumphant. It worked. Oh my God, he said, loud enough that 2 colleagues looked over, his voice doing its best impression of shock. Is it my wife? There was a pause. Sir, the patient's ID identifies her as Bianca Castellano. The room tilted. He heard the name twice in his head before it landed. Bianca, not me, Bianca. I don't understand, he managed. Sir, she's in critical condition from what appears to be acute poisoning. You need to come now. He doesn't remember leaving the boardroom. He remembers the elevator and pounding the wall of it with his fist, and a cab driver yelling at him to slow down with the door, and the antiseptic smell of the emergency department hallway hitting him like a wall. When he finally got there, siren still going somewhere behind a set of double doors. And there, sitting stiff and pale on a row of plastic chairs, was Desmond, a police officer standing beside him taking notes. And beside the officer, standing with her arms folded, her face calm in a way that frightened Marshall more than anything else that day, was me. I want to tell you what that moment looked like from where I stood, because I've replayed it 1,000 times since. My husband, coming through those hospital doors expecting to find me dead, found me instead standing perfectly upright, perfectly alive, looking at him the way you look at someone you've finally, completely stopped being afraid of. That's him, Desmond said to the officer, his voice cracking. That's Mr. Whitfield. He's the one who told me to deliver it. 2 officers crossed the hallway toward him before he could even process what was happening. He backed up until he hit the wall. Mr. Marshall Whitfield? Yes, he said, the word barely audible. We need to ask you some questions in connection with the death of Bianca Castellano. Death. I watched the word hit him like something physical. His knees actually buckled. No, he said. No, it has to be an accident. It must have been something in the food. One of the officers held up an evidence bag with the container and the yellow note still inside. Your driver gave us a full statement, sir, and we already have lab results back on the food. There's a substantial quantity of poison in what's left in that container. Is this your handwriting? I'd already told the officers everything I knew, which by then was quite a bit. Desmond had called me himself, an hour earlier, sobbing, confused, terrified that he'd done something terribly wrong, telling me he thought the lunch had been meant for our house. And he was so sorry, before either of us understood what the lunch even was. It was the 2 of us putting it together on the phone, piece by piece, that led me to call the police myself before Marshall had even left his meeting. He turned to me then, desperate, the way people get desperate only once they've already lost. Help me, please, this is a misunderstanding. I never meant for any of this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry, though God knows I'd cried enough that year already, quietly, in rooms he never bothered to notice. Desmond called me an hour ago, I said. He was crying. He told me he thought he'd delivered something to the wrong person and that she was sick. We didn't know what it meant yet, not really, but I knew enough. I looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in months. You wanted to kill me, Marshall. For money. For her. He went down onto the hospital floor, right there in front of everyone, sobbing in a way I'd never once seen him sob in 15 years of marriage, and I felt, God help me. Almost nothing, not triumph, not even much grief. Just a strange settled stillness, like something that had been clenched in my body for a very long time had finally let go. Marshall Whitfield, you're under arrest. The cuffs went on. He looked back at me once as they led him out, and I didn't look away, and I didn't reach for him either. I drove home that night, with the windows cracked despite the cold, just to feel the air on my face. The house felt different walking back into it, not haunted, the way I thought it might, but quiet in a way that finally felt like peace instead of loneliness. I sat at that same kitchen table where I'd set down his coffee that morning, where he hadn't even glanced at me. And I thought about how close I'd come, without ever knowing it, to never sitting at that table again. I filed for divorce within the week. The house is still mine. The business my father built is still mine. And the strange thing, the thing I still can't fully explain, even now, is how much I find myself thinking about Desmond's confusion that day. That small human misreading of one ordinary word, and how it became the only reason I'm here to tell you any of this at all.